So let's take a few minutes here to talk about sociological theory as pertains to death and dying. Now, we will, for the most part, always be in the symbolic interaction camp, meaning that when we have our discussions about death and dying in this course, we're going to be talking at the micro level. It's kind of challenging for us to think about concepts related to death and dying at anything less than an intimate level. These are such serious conversations that we have that we tend to frame them in terms of our own individual feelings and attitudes and beliefs. And so we will stay pretty much in the symbolic interaction camp in our discussions. However, there are some theoretical advances with regard to the other major sociological theories. And I'm talking here about functional theory, conflict theory, and feminist theory. So we're going to take a few minutes now to talk about what some of those advances or ideas are with regard to those other three theoretical camps. So we're going to go first to functional theory. And what we find here with functional theory, now we're talking at the macro level, which means we're talking about aggregated research. We're talking about big picture structural issues and how they impact the individual. And so there are three sub-theories, so to speak, in the field of functional theory. The first of those is disengagement theory. Disengagement theory is from the early 1960s, and this theory said that elderly people realize the inevitability of death and they begin to systematically disengage from society. Further, this theory would assert that this disengagement is a positive function for society, hence functional theory. And another interesting thing about disengagement theory, after the theory was tested, they found that it wasn't the case. However, you still see disengagement theory in research literature. You see it cited. You see it in your sociology textbooks. However, it's important for you to know that it really doesn't hold water. All right, the second theory that we want to talk about under the broad umbrella of functional theory is activity theory. Again, at the macro level here. And what we find with activity theory, and activity theory came about as a response to the perceived problems with disengagement theory. And so these theorists who first developed activity theory said that life satisfaction in old age really depends on active maintenance of relationships, both personal and communal. Now again, we're at the macro level here, so we're talking about aggregated data. When this hypothesis was tested, it was found that many elderly people, as long as they were able to keep those established ties with their family, their friends, with maybe former co-workers, and within their community, that their life satisfaction was better. And so as they aged, as the process of dying began, they tended to be more well-adjusted maybe than those who shut themselves off from the broader society. So those two from the 1960s. Now continuity theory is a little bit more recent, I believe, but don't quote me, from the 1980s. And continuity theory actually goes against the grain for functional theory. Continuity theory is a micro-level theory, and functional theory does not usually venture into the micro-level realm. Because functional theory is talking about how the structure impacts the individual, rarely do we flip that around and talk about how the individual impacts the structure in a positive way. So continuity theory says that older adults will try to maintain the same activities that they had in earlier life, and it uses what we call the life course approach to define concepts related to normal aging. So continuity theory asserts to us that at the micro level, individuals want to maintain those same ties that they established to the community, to their friends, to their family, and if they can do this within their own personal scope of life, the process of aging won't be as challenging or difficult for them. So rather than looking at how the structure is making the individual behave in a certain way, continuity theory says the individual is defining for him or herself what the processes relating to aging, relating to the concept of death and dying are going to be. And when the individual does that, their quality of life and also then death is better. So that's functional theory. Now we also want to talk about conflict theory. Now conflict theory, generally speaking, again, conflict theory is a macro level theory, but we're going to use it here both at the macro and the micro level. And conflict theorists are interested in the implications for a graying society. Now, in the United States, the focus has been on youth for many, many years, and largely this is because of the influence of the baby boomers over time in our society. And so the elderly, though, as we begin to gray as a society, are at risk to be marginalized because of this focus that we've had on youth. So let's talk about some facts here. At the macro level, we know this: the elderly run a greater risk of living in poverty. Now, we do have social service programs in place to try and help combat this idea that the elderly run this greater risk of living in poverty. However, as a fact, we do know that as many elderly people in our society age, problems related to poverty start to crop up. And a lot of this has to do with the cost of health care. As health care costs increase exponentially, elderly people's incomes cannot keep up with that. And as you age, you have to rely more and more and more on our healthcare system to try and keep you going. And so that's one of the biggest problems that elderly people face with regard to living in poverty. Another macro level fact: the older you get, the harder it is for you to get a good job in your career field. So should you get displaced, for example, a recession or a depression, and you lose your job, you get laid off, if you're elderly and you have to go back out into the workforce, regardless of the experience you bring to the job, it's going to be harder for you to get a good job in your career field than it will be for someone fresh out of college right into the job market. And conflict theorists would remind us that this may not have anything necessarily to do with you being older. It may have to do with you costing the company more money, not only in your salary, but also in healthcare related expenses that the company would also have to offer to you. So there's a lot of issues going on there. Now, we can talk about this fact also at the micro level. Problems related to getting that job as you age can also be related directly to individual depression. It can also be related to suicide rates. It can be related to family stress. It can be related to divorce. There are many, many other personal issues that we could discuss, bringing this down to the micro level. One thing that conflict theorists want us to be sure we understand is the concept of ageism. This is where we push out the elderly in order to bring in the young. And so we do really need to look at the implications for a graying society. As America ages, what does all of this mean? Now, I haven't read any research here, but I'm going to make a small assertion with regard to what some of these implications might be. We are starting to age, and as we age, the power in our society will shift. And so while we have been focused on youth as beauty, youth as a positive attribute, as we begin to age and the elderly people as a cohort gain more power in our society, our concepts of what is important to us may change over time. Our focus on youth may change over time. And indeed, I think if you're around long enough, you'll probably see this begin to happen. So those are our conflict level perspectives. Now we also want to take a look at feminist theory. Now feminist theory we can use at the macro and micro level. And feminist theory asserts to us that ageism is really no different than the other isms in our society. Here we have the examples of sexism or racism. So another fact here: women live longer than men. Now we know that at the aggregate level, It may not be the case in your own personal life that has happened in your family. However, at the aggregate level, women tend to live to the age of 80 and a half, where men tend to live to the age of 75. And some reasons why this is the case. Women are more likely to seek health care services than men, and this helps to contribute to that longer lifespan. Women are less likely to seek danger, both in their personal and professional lives. Now, this is changing a little bit because we do have more women entering traditionally dangerous occupations such as law enforcement, firefighter, soldier, military, etc. Women also tend to drink and smoke less. Now, again, that is also changing. We can look at some of that aggregate level data and find that women are starting to keep pace with men with regard to social activities. So all of these things, however, today do tend to add to the fact that women have a longer lifespan than men do. Another interesting facet here, when we talk about feminist theory, a lot of people get confused and think we're just talking about women. But when you talk about women, you are also by default talking about men. And feminist theory at its very essence doesn't say that women need to be in a better position than men. What feminist theory really wants to expose is the tensions that make things unequal among genders. And if you can do that, then you start to level the playing field for both genders. So in this case, while we're highlighting that women have a better shake than men with regard to aging in society, if we can start to examine why that's the case, we might be able to close that gap in the lifespan. And one of the ways we might do that, for example, is encouraging men to seek health care services when they are in need. One other interesting thing here that I want to talk about is broken heart disease. Now, broken heart disease isn't necessarily a feminist theory, but it is an interesting theory about gender. And what it tells us is that men tend to die at much, much higher rates of heart-related disease than do women. And one of the theories about that is this theory called broken heart disease theory, which says that because during the course of their lifespan, men tend to bottle up and hold in their emotions, at some point their hearts simply break. Now again, this is a theory, and we would have to test it, and I don't know that we have any real valid way of testing whether or not that's the case, but it is an interesting theory nonetheless. When you bottle up your emotions and you're not able to experience the full range of emotions that you need to process life events, this has serious repercussions on your physical being. And that's really the essence of broken heart disease. All right, so that's our feminist theory. Now we need to move on to very quickly talk about symbolic interaction theory. Now I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that here because we will be spending time through the course of our course on this theory. Symbolic interaction theory is always at the micro level. We're always talking about the individual and how the individual pushes back against the structure of society. And some of the research questions that we want to ask here, and there are dozens, maybe hundreds of questions that we want to ask, but some of those that we want to ask in the context of this course. What are the quality of life issues that the elderly must confront as they age? What are the experiences of individuals when they must confront issues of death and dying? And how do children process the concept of death? And so on. You can see how, rather than looking at the aggregate level, we get down to the individual here and we ask questions to the individual and we search out those individual meanings to try and make sense of those and to see how they influence the structures of society. All right, so we've talked about symbolic interaction, we've talked about feminist theory at the macro and micro, we've talked about conflict theory at the macro and micro, We've talked about functional theory almost always at the macro, but this gives you a really good brief overview of how we can tie some of those major sociological theories into the concepts related to death and dying. I hope this helps. Take care.